Okay, so I wanted to pause the recording for a bit to kind of check in and share what I'm thinking. This is going well. Got a decent amount of big shapes in that I'm happy with. So first and foremost, I am using big, simple, blocky shapes in the beginning. Now I know these aren't perfect squares or cubes or big rectangles or just simple cylinders like I used in the examples, but even though the sketch is really rough, I'll show you some of the simple shapes I am using. For example, sorry, get rid of that. For example, these sort of shoulder sections, these back sections here, they're pretty much big solid rectangles, and all I've done is I've shaved the corners here to make it a little more complex. I'm imagining that from here these connections are cylindrical, so there's sort of a cylinder here sitting on top of this other cube that's sort of down and behind everything. So I'm using more shapes than I did in my previous demos, but again, I think if you slow down and you just don't look at the entire shape, oh gosh, I can't think of a shape like that in my head, and what's going on? Don't think of everything. If you're having trouble getting your head around a shape this complicated, don't think of the whole thing as one intricately complicated shape. See the bigger forms. See the large chunks that make it up, and look how they are playing with each other, how they're sitting together in the design. Where's the weight? Does it feel cool to you? Is there enough breakup in different shapes so that some of them stick out in space and break up the silhouette enough? Think of those big picture things, and using simple shapes to do that is the easiest way. So even though, again, I'll repeat myself because I like repeating myself. Sorry if it gets annoying. Once again, simple shapes brought together to make more complicated shapes. This having some layer issues. I hit Q and it put me in quick mask mode and got confusing for a bit. This shoulder, kind of exposed shoulder joint, is all it really is a cylindrical hole, a circular hole, in the side, and sitting sort of inside or right next to that hole is a cylinder, as an upright cylinder on the up and down axis. And that's all that is right now. It just so happens to be that I have a hole with a shape sticking out of it on the side of a bigger shape, and there's more big shapes next to that. But you might remember me saying earlier in the other videos is that if you break this element down, this whole area here, one by one, or excuse me, just by itself, it's not so complicated. It's a cylinder sitting next to a hole. And in that regard, I am still using very, very simple shapes. Okay, so I'm going to keep refining and cutting into things, but I kind of wanted to share where I'm at because I think I'm ready to step forward and start trying to make this design better because I like where all the big parts are. Now I want to keep going. Alright, instead of fast forwarding right away, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm going to do next. And as I'm looking at this, thinking about what it needs is the lesson about subdividing up my shapes sort of comes to mind because I've figured out this large mass in the middle. I like that it has shapes sticking out the back of it. It's got a bit of a nose sticking forward here. I kind of like it's very straightforward, very simple, but I like the overall, what I have so far. So, but as I said in my in the earlier lesson, sometimes I think designs can end up less than what they could be, or they end up a little too simplified when we're dealing with designs of tech and machinery. And so I feel like these big shapes, a lot of them are a little too big and simple. So what I want to do is start kind of cutting into them and subdividing a bit. So I'm going to start doing that. The first things that come to mind are this. I have this little square in the front, and feels too square, feels too simple. So I'm going to shave in on this corner here and this corner, and I'm going to bring the whole thing to more of a point. I'm also going to cut into these because I think they are just big. They're just big blocks right now, and it's a little boring. So here I'm gonna cut. We have a much better opportunity back here for something really cool. So I'm gonna start with a split line on kind of around the third of the object. I'm not sure what this is gonna become, but I'm just gonna split into it. I think the back of the shape of this whole entire thing, from the side, will be coming down like that, and here the big block sits. So I want to follow that line. So I'm going to cut this shape like this and then like that, and cut this away so that this shape follows that line. Hope it makes sense. So as sort of a subdivision, I'm not going to cut the line all the way back. I'm going to stop again around the third mark and come down. So remember, always, these are ways to think. These are tricks to help you break your designs up. These are tricks to help get started. The essential or the beginner lessons are meant to give you an arsenal. Make it so that this is not an overwhelming task, and at every turn, hopefully, you'll have lots of options. So all I was really thinking when I started saying that is that I'm splitting this shape on its third lines, right? You don't have to do it exactly like that. By all means, try it my way for a bit. Try it a couple times, play with it, but it's your tool to use. It's your trick to pull out once in a while. So if you like to do it a lot smaller. I mean, even if you like to do it in halves, whatever. So it's funny. I want to get these things. I want to share these ideas with as many people as I can, but then I also want people to use them. Have that lead. I want people learning these tricks to let them lead themselves to have them lead themselves to their own way of doing things, or their own conclusions, or their own interpretations too. So again, I know I talk a lot, and maybe you didn't need that super long explanation, but I think it's helpful for people to be reminded that they can, really do anything they want with this stuff, and that there aren't, in terms of designing and being creative, I mean, it's your world. It's yours to play around in. I'm not gonna tell you how to be creative or do it correctly. I'd love to help and make it so that these things are easier to try and easier to attack. So this whole design right now is made up of big, planar, faceted shapes. I'm going to start breaking into that as well, because I don't want straight lines everywhere on the entire design, because I don't have a choice. I think you get the point. So I'm going to start in a way, and I think I'll probably, sort of the second step, or the evolved, the next evolution of the kind of the quote-unquote subdivision trick is to not just use it to what the hell am I trying to say? Put in seam lines or cut lines, but you can also use the subdivision to change a shape. So let's say the top of this block back here is rectangular, right? So if I'm drawing this from the top, that's what it looks like, straight down, right? Well, if this is too simple, and I know I want to break it up, I usually start with the easy ones of rounding the corners. And if I break this up into thirds, not quite, but you get my drift. And I'm going to use this rough kind of template to break this shape up. Well, I don't have to just cut in and use it for seam lines. I can also do things like add shapes to it. So you can use it to, you can sort of, when you're subdividing and making things more complicated, you can also implement the first lesson, which is, let's just combine some shapes in an easy, straightforward way, so that we're not left with the most simple things that, we're not left with the first thing we thought up. We have options. So, say this is the top of I'm still drawing like the top of this shoulder pack thing, whatever it is. And, I got some circles, and this is some sort of, plate or cut or whatever it is. So now I have, I'm sort of combining the two ideas. I use the subdivision method to figure out, hey, I think, right here up along the, this third line here where this junction is, Could use some more, something else to the form. All right, let me add a cylinder. Boom, boom, boom. And then I go from there, and these details, they start to feed off of this cylinder. Whatever it is I end up doing. But now it's sort of like, now I have a new shape to go off of. So forgive me if this seems, once again, very, very basic, but I really want to spell out a little bit how I'm using these ideas in conjunction with each other to flow through the design process. And I really wanted to break it down sort of to its atomic level, so that if there's someone who's not used to drawing, techie machines, or more of a novice, or someone who just wants to get better at drawing this kind of stuff, that I'm giving you enough ideas and enough of an inner vocabulary that you can look at lots of different shapes, or conceive of lots of different shapes, and not be intimidated by them, but be willing to, break them down, give it a go, give it a try, right? Okay. I might keep this for later. And oops. I'm gonna fun little trick. Just keep that for later. Maybe I'll transform it onto the side of something. So here's my the beginning of those subdivisions and also subtractions. I'm removing this chunk of these big blocks here. I'm going to pull those out, and I might not remove all of it directly. I think maybe I'll leave a section in, so maybe I'll be pulling out this much, and I won't quite make it such a clean, big, hard subtraction. But again, back to the lessons, I'm going to use the subdivision method to find my lines, and then I'm going to subtract some material in order to make this fairly simple shape that from the side, looks something like this. Excuse me. I'm going to use subtraction to make this fairly straightforward shape look something, like this. Right? Very, very simple, but when you use it in conjunction with other things, it starts to give you lots of options. You can break out of that simplicity very, very easily. Okay, I think that explanation, I think you've had enough of my over-explaining of things. I hope it was useful, even if, only some of it was. That's good enough for me. I'm going to be developing this series for a while, and I want to do multiple videos of both the Essentials or Novice series, Intermediate, and even all the way up to Advanced, where I'm using the most developed sort of frame of mind I have for this kind of stuff, and trying to break it down and share it. So hopefully, as I go, these will be won't have as much unnecessary talking. I'd like to get better at this and make it more succinct and more clear. But especially in the beginner stages, I think there's a lot to say about, again, I love the word demystifying, because I want to really take something that may seem complicated or may seem difficult and break it down piece by piece so that it's not so intimidating. And I think it takes a few steps. I think it takes a few tries, and it takes a couple different ways of explaining it, a couple examples, until it really kind of starts to sink in. Okay, on with the drawing. Hello again. So my goal with these lessons is to kind of bunch them up together, and after I show you 2 or 3 in a row, I want to do a concept for myself the way I would be doing it, and show how these tips and these little tricks come into play on you know, concepts with higher detail or a higher level of finish than just the demos. So for this one, I thought I'd have a little fun and do a mech torso. I didn't want to do a whole mech because that would take a while. So just really quick, so we know what we're looking at. This is kind of the chest here, and the shoulders. He's missing a head right now, which you'll see in a bit. Maybe give him some ears. The shoulder joint, there's a big hole, a circular hole on the side here, and the shoulder would probably come out here, and his arm would, come down next to his body here. Hi, I've got fingers. So that's what we're looking at. It's just a chest of a big giant robot. As you can see, I'm starting out pretty simple. By the way, the robot's already done, and I'm kind of going through the steps that I saved along the way that I think are good kind of checkpoints. So, as you can see, the shapes are simple, and I'm not giving myself too much detail to worry about in the beginning. This is kind of his waist down here and his kind of groin, hip, crotch area. I end up deleting that later, so don't worry about that. But for example, his chest is it's kind of a tapered cube right now, and it just sticks out in the front like this, pretty simple stuff, generally speaking. I did cut into it once, I think, and make it so that the shape has a bit of a second taper, so I kind of form a facet right there, just so that this top shape is not so simple that it's just one tapered square. The big form on the side of the shoulder really is fairly simple, even though there's some detail on it now. The shape could be considered a square with some parts cut out of it. Now, I know that sounds maybe overly simple, but let me explain. So if here's the profile from the side, I don't like this blue, I don't know why, here we go. I knew that I kind of just wanted a big mass next to his chest, and I didn't start, to be honest, I didn't start with a big cube or a big square, extruded square, because I've been doing this a little while, and I felt comfortable kind of jumping in and trying to get to a little more complicated shape right away. But keep losing my colors. But with that said, what you can see here is there's a top and a slanted angle here and a slanted angle down the bottom, so that this smaller facet sort of sticks forward up here. So from the side, if this is the front, really I just cut this corner, I cut the bottom one, and now I have this shape with a hole in the middle, and this goes in, to make room for the shoulder joint. So here's the top, and I actually made it circular down here, and all that is really is just I'm echoing the circle I started with in the beginning. And that kind of decision comes, after I make the first simple decision of having a circle in the middle. So that the first decision is really, really simple. I just know that his arm is going to come out of a circle and I'm going to go from there. I'm going to build from there. So down here, in order to make this, whole profile a little more interesting, I just cue off of this circle I already have and use it to affect the profile of the shape, right? So, and back here, I basically just kind of subtract this corner here. So with a little bit of simple kind of carving and subtraction, I'm left with the shape I have in the concept. So, moving on. From here, I felt decent that I felt that I had a decent start, and the forms were all in the right place. So I start to kind of cut in a little bit and add more detail. And the new layer looks like this. So I'll talk a little bit about what I did. The first thing I started doing was just adding some simple shapes in on top to kind of, get away from the really, really simplified shapes. For example, I just added a couple little cylinders up here. I added a cylinder out here thinking, hey, I might elaborate on this exposed shoulder joint. Let me kind of get that started. I know that this circle is a ring meant to rotate the stuff inside of it. So I added a few concentric seams and a little more detail so that I can show more detail later on. It's kind of exposed moving parts rather. Up here on the front, I cut in on the side of the shape so that these points come to these parts come to a bit of a taper here. And I also added it was a little too square and too straightforward, so I added a little circle and I curved the edge of the shape around it and went from there. So now, and then I used the subdivision trick to kind of add some seams and cut in. So now I have this cool new kind of shape here at the front. You can see the same thing on the other side. Just slowly, I'm making simple choices, simple steps in order to break down the shapes a bit, in order to make them a little more complicated. And all I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit of everything. This seam here, I'm looking at this big facet and I think, let me cut into it and then cut down the side so that it joins this circle. And that's just subdivision. That's just me saying, hey, this is too plain. Let me cut into it and make this one big shape look like multiple shapes brought together to make the big shape. So I'm doing everything. I'm adding, I'm cutting away, and I'm slowly starting to subdivide this stuff. On the chest, you can see I've added a bit more. This was at a point where I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I thought, let me subdivide this this front here by adding a seam and extruding, kind of a shape outward, so that it looks a little more. I don't know. I was wondering maybe it'll make it look cool. On the top here, I kind of extruded a. I just sort of added some mass at the top, and really it's just sort of a tapered cube. And I just kind of stuck that on the top to see if I could make the shape more interesting. Back here on the inside of his back, I put some seams in with subdivision, just cutting into the shape easily. This is actually, if this is a big flat rectangle, then these cuts, hope you can tell what I'm doing here. These cuts are on the third line. And then I made another cut horizontally, and in this one panel I decided that's exposed and I'll add some detail inside. So I'm starting to cut in, I added another seam down here, starting to subdivide just a bit, I like how the overall mass is feeling. So I start to cut in, add little things, see what happens. So at this point, I realized there was something I didn't quite like, and I think it's that it was this big triangle. It was these sharp, triangular kind of shapes that I feel like maybe I've seen before. Maybe, I don't know, just wasn't doing it for me at the time. And I felt like I have a big circle that I like the circle. I kind of like these curves I was making by adding cylinders. And I thought, let me augment this shape a bit because it's not doing it for me. So this is a little bit outside of the lessons we covered, but I want to show it anyway. Don't be intimidated or overwhelmed because this is just sort of a step towards refinement. It's taking the big shapes I already have and kind of bringing them together. And I'll talk a lot more about this in later lessons. Homogenizing your design, picking a shape language and sticking with it, etc., etc., etc. So I'm not going to go too far into the frame of mind I'm in, but I'm just going to explain what I did. As I said, I was sort of starting to like these curves and these circular kind of this feeling. I didn't like the points on the front, so I curved this part here and I curved that part here. I kept what I had elsewhere, and so I was left with this sort of shape that I really like, and I thought, let me take that over to the chest. So I angled this, I kind of redrew the entire section. So I angled it down, but then I just shot it out forward, brought it straight down. I'm rounding the corners a lot because I start to like that nice round feeling. So that's another kind of topic, but I'll just keep going. And I brought it back and tried to kind of complete it. In the middle here, I'm thinking, this big shape, it's too simple. So let me put in a subdivision on the side here where I know it's going to kind of feel nice to have one, and we'll go from there. And I liked the feeling of it, so I went forward. Now, it felt too weird without a head, so I had to give him a head. Using this shape as a reference, I kind of gave him a quick head that I thought would work. I'm not going to go into detail. I added a bunch of shapes together to kind of make one. I started out knowing what I wanted, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. Just going to jump forward here. So here are the adjustments I want to make, and I did that and started another sketch on top. So if I hide the body, the old body, and I hide the red kind of adjustments, there it is. I told you I was going to get rid of the waist. Now there's that new chest, much simpler, and the head is a little more figured out too. So now I feel there's a lot of reasons I like it like this. As I said, I'll get into some of that stuff about form language a little later, but just for the sake of argument, I'm feeling pretty good about this sketch, by the way. And just for the sake of argument, let's talk about this big chest shape. From the side, it pretty much looks like this. Okay. Now, you might be thinking, oh, great, draw a cool shape, and that's, it's easy. Why not? You're designing robots, no problem. But if you slow down and you think about it, I knew I wanted a rectangular extrusion to come forward, right? That's the simplest way I can think of it. if I'm just extruding, you know, a rectangle, here's his head, and I'm just extruding this out, right? First, I have this big shape to work with. Now I can just start cutting in. Boom, you know, boom, boom. Let's just say those are my cuts, right? And as I talked about before, instead of just leaving now this new, this new shape like this, I'm going to, because I like this rounded, soft feeling, I'm gonna, in my mind, I'm sort of gonna chamfer and round these edges. This one actually comes down a bit, so I'm rounding this edge, right? And now I'm connecting them. You might remember this from the 3D demo. Rounding this edge. This is just one, you know, one trick. It's one stylistic kind of approach where instead of leaving, you know, I want to be really, really clear that instead of just leaving the edge completely, you know, sharp, I'm softening it and blending between the two angles so I get a curve. That's all it is. I just happen to be doing it on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 corners, so that now the final shape looks a little more complicated and detailed. But if you can kind of break down the subdivisions of the whole thing, sorry, I got a new tablet and it likes to leave the selections on for me. So I can't draw. When you think of just the whole thing, you know, first, you know, just this simple mass first starts to get a little easy. And you kind of do the same thing over here. Think about how to break this complicated shape down into a simple one, or excuse me, yeah, how to break up a simple shape into a more complicated one slowly but surely. You start to get somewhere, especially if you put them next to each other, right? Boom. Now we're kind of, you know, we're starting to stack these simple steps up into more complicated results. Now, I am trying to make this as clear and concise as possible. I know I can get kind of verbose and wordy sometimes, so I hope that makes sense. I could go on and talk about how, you know what? Just for the sake of argument, let's do that again. So the head here has, it's basically, one of the parts of the head is a rectangular form. It's a rectangular shape. Boom, in space, one of the most simple shapes you can make, right? Now, see if I can do this so it's easy to read. Just for the sake of making my point again, because sometimes I'll watch videos and someone will say something, an artist will explain a really cool idea, and he'll do it in his on one, he or she will do it on one example, and I think, okay, whoa, okay, wait, what happened? So I want to do this a couple times to hopefully let it sink in. Now, there is another shape here extruding out from the side of it. Let's ignore that shape, right? Let's break this down into simple parts. In fact, let me just erase it for simplicity's sake. Oops. Okay, we just have this one kind of hunk we're dealing with, hunk of tech. So I have a rectangle. I add a little cylinder on the back. You know, the outline is too simple. I want to add some form. I stick a cylinder out the back. Right, it's back here on the other one. I put a circle in the front, because it kind of feels like a camera or a sensor or maybe a laser. I don't know what it is, but it feels right to have it on the front. So I just slap it on there. I want a circle right here. Right here is the front face, right? Now look, subdividing up just a little bit to make this shape more interesting. Look at what I did naturally on the third lines, 1 and 2, right? Here's my front face. Pardon my horrible perspective. Not completely even, mostly even. I have, you know, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, right? Easy, even breakup. I do thirds all the time without even realizing it. Now, I'm not drawing those thirds everywhere. I'm just using them as a subdivision, as a reference point for subdivision. Okay? Down here, I actually do use it to add lines. Okay? Up here, I don't, but I place it. I use the line as an axis for my circle. Now, again, forgive me if this seems sort of obtuse or overly thought, but again, this is a more essential level, more beginning level kind of idea where I'm not saying you have to do things just like this, but I really want to strip away any mystery so that if you're new to this kind of frame of mind, or if you're new to trying to design things like this, I'm giving you some very, very simple ways to look at things so that you're not intimidated and you're not afraid to jump in. You at least have something to work with and start the process. Okay. Now that disclaimer's over, down here I subdivide a bit more for some, detail ratio. I think I just cut this in half, and so on and so forth, right? So underneath is my shape. I think I rounded this corner out, brought it forward like that, because it's, again, too simple. Simple, I have a straight corner, I round it out. Back here, there is, I cut some seams and I add some detail with what? Easy subdivision. I'm not going to do the measurements and show you what line it's on, but looks like a fifth to me, whatever. I cut down here to open up the corner. There's some plates. I don't know what it is yet. I extend the opening over to a circular shape. And boom, I leave it because that's enough detail for me, right? So there's a lot of other things that go into this, like what scale is my object? What is the actual object I'm designing? Is it real world? Is it fake? Is it, what kind of design language should it have? But don't worry about all that. It's coming in later lessons. I just want to take some of these mechanical shapes and really break them down to their most basic elements so that in case you're looking at them and thinking, how do you do that? I want to take some of that mystery away. So here we are again. I've got a rectangular block. Break it down a bit, start to subdivide, you get some detail. And I'm doing that, again, I'm doing it next to this big head shape, right? And I'm doing 2 of them. And that right there, just for free, starts to get me a lot of, action in terms of the design. So, hope that hope that I made my point. Maybe I made it too many times, but that pretty much brings everything together. I'm going to turn on all my other layers and show you how I ended up. So give me 1 second to turn everything on, turn on my lines, turn everything else off. Let's even turn off this perspective. And here we are. So here's the line work with flat colors and just a couple little adjustments. Sorry. A little shading, a little more shading, and ta-da. Okay, you might be thinking, that was kind of a big jump, Joe. This drawing looks pretty detailed to me. And you're right, but so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I get from that sketch to this point, and whether and you know, I think I can point out how this is a lot of simple steps added up with each other. So let's start with this chess piece, just for sake of argument here. I still have this big simple shape that you know, I explained how I ended up with this, right? And in the process of refinement, clearly I started thinking, okay, you know, I'm happy with the overall shape, but still needs to be broken down a bit. These big areas are too simple, especially for the scale of this object. And again, that's something I'll get into on a later lesson. So let me run through this, try and run through this quickly. We can talk about how I'm using the same techniques. So for example, on the side here, you know, I'm thinking, you know, between the shapes, between these big masses, it might be nice to see some exposed machinery. So I decide, okay, let me cut away into this so we can see some of the insides. And I do that right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, you know, I just round the edges, the corners, to match the rest of the object. So I make a big cut here, and I think to myself, okay, I'm peeling away the surface, the plating or the skin of the object, of the machine. And now we get to see, you know, the fun inner mechanisms inside. And I did one of the easiest tricks that I know, which is the first shape I made, I just follow the cut line. Let me grab another color here. I followed the cut line and used that to show some of the framing, which I colored in orange there, right? And you know, honestly, after that, it's really just a bunch of small sort of high frequency detail that helps make it look, you know, sort of high fidelity rather. So that's how I got there. You know, after I made that cut, it's just a simple step to fill it in. Up here, I thought that on the front here, I thought this shape was getting very simple, so I wanted to add on something to break it up just a bit and help show the scale. So I just stuck sort of an extended cylinder into it. So let's just say this shape is sitting on top, and it's just inserted into the within the surface, and so it would intersect here, and you don't see that part. Okay, then you know, in my mind, I forget how, if I drew it first or if I did this later, but I just extend it, the front of it back. I lean it back so it's at an angle. Again, the quick trick was that I used it to match those angles, so that, you know, maybe from the side the shape kind of flows a bit. But shape language and all that stuff, I'm going to talk about it later. So here I have this really elemental shape added. And what do? I use some subdivision to, add the seams. I'm using subdivision to add this big seam, and then I sort of come back in a second time to add some detail on top of it, right? Once I have this big seam to work with, that's really just all I'm going on. In the sketch, this is a big black line, just like this. But as I'm refining and as I'm clarifying, I can come in here, I subtract a block and sort of show a little bit of what's underneath it. But it first starts with finding where I want to put that seam. Boom, easy line across the surface. As I start subdividing, I just use more tricks. I keep using my tricks to add detail on top of that. I could go on, and I could go over the entire design. I don't think. I think it'll take too long and be too lecture-y if I go over every detail. I want you to kind of hopefully be able to see some of this stuff for yourself. It's easy to look at a line drawing with this much high frequency detail and get overwhelmed. But if you start to break down, each shape on its own, it doesn't have to be that complicated. So, with that said, I think I'll leave it there. I hope all these tips have made sense all the way through to this, refined line drawing. And you kind of feel like you can look at something this detailed and, not be too overwhelmed or think it's out of reach. And that hopefully when you add them all together, these tips kind of, you can start thinking about how to add them, you can start thinking about how they can work together in succession also, especially to get to this last, final level of detail. Going to leave it here because it's just a, didn't do this to make a perfect render or anything. I just wanted to build this up from the ground and show you how this sketch turns into this after some cleaning up. Hope you liked it. Hope you got something from it. Hope you're feeling ready to attack some complicated shapes without any fear and without thinking that it's a magical process that you can't do. I'm telling you, if you break anything down into its parts, it's easy to digest. So thanks for checking out this first chunk of the Essential series. I really appreciate your support, and as always, I'm completely open to requests, recommendations. If there's anything you did or didn't like about the video, by all means, let me know. I'm all ears because I'm going to be doing more of these, and we are going to go up into the intermediate and advanced levels. But hopefully you'll, if you like these, you'll check out the rest of the early or beginner lessons so that you can add those to your arsenal too. Thanks once again, and I will catch you around.